Good morning, students. Today, we're going to talk about the American presidency. So, let's talk about it. If you ask a 19th century person, anyone from that time period, American, to come and walk through Washington, D.C., and look at the three branches of our government, they will be shocked not at the U.S. Congress or the Supreme Court, but at the presidency. Why? Because the powers of the American presidency have grown and the office have changed. Like when George Washington started, he had only 4 cabinet secretaries, right? What are those? Anybody? Attorney General, right? Secretary of Treasury, which was Alexander Hamilton, remember? Yes. So Secretary of State, right? And Defense. At the time it was called War. Now you have more than a dozen cabinet members because the branch, not just in cabinet, but also in political appointments, thousands of them. It has grown in size and power. So a 19th century person will be unbelievably amazed at the size and the growth of the American presidency. So let's talk about American presidency today in detail. You watched the FDR's role during economic crisis, right? Now we're going to talk about more about the different roles the president has and what are the powers the president have and where do they get from all these details. Let's start with powers of the American president. The powers could be classified into 3 categories. 3. Write it down. The first one are called expressed powers. Expressed. That means the powers have been expressed in the American Constitution. It has clearly said these powers belong to the president. For example, the president is the commander-in-chief, not a governor, not a senator, not a Supreme Court justice. Only the president could lead the army in a war, in a battle, right? So commander-in-chief is clearly mentioned there. But it also mentions he doesn't have the power to declare war, right? It's mentioned in the Constitution. That power is clearly given to Congress, right? Okay. So now, that is express powers. What about powers delegated? Write it down. Second one is called delegated powers. These are powers given to the presidency by Congress. Congress gives powers to the president for actions. So they will pass an act, Congress will pass a law that will give powers that the president takes and executes it. That's the second one. Now the third one is called inherent powers. Inherent powers. Inherent powers are powers which were not given by the Constitution or the Congress, but the president takes especially during the time of crisis. Crisis like what? War, terrorism threat, or even global pandemic. The presidency grows in size. One of the presidents from history who has taken enormous power during time of crisis was Abraham Lincoln. Even though he is considered the greatest president, he is also considered someone who has been abused, who has abused the office because he did things which was not mentioned in the Constitution. He went beyond the powers given to him. Like, for example, he had income tax. Okay? He blockaded the South. And he called for militia. And he suspended habeas corpus. Habeas corpus, remember, we talked about habeas corpus during the time of death penalty. So this is, you have my body, I have the right to be present in front of a jury. He just threw them in jail without a proper jury trial because to conduct the war effort. So president's powers grows enormously. It could violate the civil liberties of people in order to achieve security. So security versus liberty dilemma, and the security, the president could trump all liberties that has been given in the Constitution. So those are the 3 different categories of powers. Okay, let's talk about what the president's role is. So today I'm going to talk about 8 different roles the American president have. 8 different types of roles the American president have. The first one, write it down. Commander-in-Chief. Commander-in-Chief. That is, if you think of American presidency and you say like, oh, the most powerful office in the world, the first thought that comes to your mind is Commander-in-Chief, right? What does Commander-in-Chief mean? Chief of the armed forces, right? All the armed forces, he controls, he directs them, especially in time of war. But we know he can't declare war. Can he repel an attack which is happening because he doesn't have time to run to Congress to ask for permission? You know the answer, yes. How long can he keep on fighting? He cannot fight forever, right? Technically, there's a war powers resolution passed in 1973 by Congress. It's an act to prevent the presidents from getting the country into war without the authorization of Congress. AUMF, write it down, AUMF, authorization to use military force. AUMF, authorization to use military force. Congress should give that. So the president could use a military to repel an attack because he doesn't have time to come and ask Congress. But guess what? He can do that, but he has to inform Congress within 48 hours, according to that act, 1973 act. Within 48 hours, 22 days, he has to inform that he is using the military either abroad or in our border because of an imminent threat and attack. And he has to wind up those activities, combat, within 60 days. 60 days is the maximum he could fight. And then 30 days to pull out of the war situation. Otherwise, Congress will not approve it. But some presidents find a loophole to stop hostilities within that 60 days and then reset the clock and keep going. Because the last time a president who officially went and asked clearly for the big war, World War II. Right? There are many times after World War II, presidents have taken the country into war without the authorization to use of military force by Congress. So Commander-in-Chief is a pretty powerful job. Now, when the Constitution was written, they did not know such things called nuclear weapons, which now is in the hands of the President of the United States, right? Only he has in a democracy. Think about this. I was reading this book called Dead Hand, which is a Pulitzer Prize winning book, and it's about Soviet Union's weapons, nuclear weapons. Even there, it's an authoritarian country, right? It's not a democracy. Even there, the head of the Communist Party, like Gorbachev when he was, before it collapsed, he cannot launch the nuclear weapons alone. There are few other people who have to punch in the codes to launch the nuclear weapons, including like Army Chief of Staff and others. Whereas in the United States, the president alone, as a commander-in-chief, can launch the nuclear weapons. Yeah, think about that. The enormous power and responsibility. You know how long it takes for a nuclear missile? Say Russia launches a nuclear missile at us, an ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, write it down, ICBM. It takes about less than 20 minutes to come from Russia to the US. And that's through the poles. Imagine you are the president of the United States and you're sleeping and they wake you up and tell you there's a missile with nuclear weapons flying at us. How do you react? You have to make a choice, either to strike it down or retaliate, let our missiles fly and bomb them. What if it was not really a missile? Because during Cold War, there were times our detectors in Greenland said there are missiles flying in, but it was a bunch of geese. So you could be mistaken, and you have to be very careful in making decisions whether they are happening or not. And all this 5,000 strategic nuclear weapons under the control of the President of the United States as a commander-in-chief. 3 different ways. ICBM, you could launch bombers through airplanes. You could go and drop nuclear weapons. And SLBM, submarine launched ballistic missiles. All this under the President's power, commander-in-chief. The war will be declared by Congress if he goes and officially asks for war authorization. But if there's an imminent attack, he could use it. He could use it and later inform Congress. Think about that power. That makes the presidency, American presidency, enormously power. Life and death of the entire world, you could say. Because the 5,000 strategic nuclear weapons is enough to destroy the world multiple times over and let the dust rumble. So now you understand the power of the weapons under the control of the American president. As commander-in-chief, he's responsible for not just the armed forces, but the mighty or really harrowing weapons of mass destruction under his control. Okay. Another thing, you got to look it up. Google this, called nuclear football. Nuclear football. And when you Google that, 2 words, you would see a bag, right? A bag, black, dark bag. That's the bag with the guy next to the president wearing the military uniform, always carrying it, especially during Cold War, wherever Ronald Reagan went, President Ronald Reagan, they carried the bag with them. So just to launch nuclear weapons anytime. So they come and give the president a set of codes, and he will be able to use that codes to, like password, code, numbers, 8-digit numbers, to press it, and that will give the command to his military people to launch the nuclear weapons. And they change the codes often to prevent. For FYI, during Cold War, there were 8-digit numbers. Can you guess? 0000. You doubt me? Just look it up. It's a declassified information. Yeah. So that is one power of the president. What will be the next one when you think of the presidency? What are the powers? What are the roles he plays as a commander-in-chief? It's like wearing different hats. You take the hat and put a new hat. The second role of the president, I would write it down, is first legislator. But you would ask, wait a minute, isn't the Congress is the legislative body? The presidency is the executive branch. And why would you call the presidency as the legislator? Excellent question. Let's talk about that. Write down under the first legislator, maybe you could put A, SOTU, SOTU. You could even put hashtag SOTU, State of the Union. State of the Union. Have you heard of it? State of the Union is the yearly address given by the American president to the U.S. Congress. He sets the policy agenda. Well, he's the only person who runs, he or she in the future, runs for the entire demographics of the United States, right? No other person, but U.S. Senator or House of Representatives, all are elected from a small region, like senators from the state, House of Representatives from the district. Nobody represents the entire American public and sells their agenda of what their policy they want to achieve, accomplish if they get elected to the office. And so the president, when he gets elected, will come to the Congress because the laws are created, legislation is done in Congress. So he urges Congress to pass those bills and send it to his table so the president gets to sign it as into law, because he has to sign it, right? Can he not sign it and still it could become a law? Yes. That is even if he doesn't sign, you could with 2/3 majority. The 2/3 majority of both House and Senate supports a bill, then it becomes the law of the land. So the president will ask one of his party members to introduce a bill. You know, through Congress lecture how this works. Introduce a bill. That bill becomes a law. So he's the first legislator, right? He could also veto if it doesn't have 2/3 majority to reject a bill in becoming a law. There's another thing as first legislator he does. And what is that? In the SOTU, let me put it in this way. Yeah, history. Thomas Jefferson, up till Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, John Adams went and gave the speech to Congress. Thomas Jefferson is reticent. He doesn't like to talk in public. So he just wrote the State of the Union and sent it to Congress. And after Thomas Jefferson, the third president, everybody followed it. They didn't go to Congress. Until in the 20th century, Woodrow Wilson, who loves to do public speaking, he was the professor before becoming president. And he started it again, went to Congress and gave a national address. And now, right after him, after Woodrow Wilson, every president followed it and go and give the speech. This is also a chance of a platform to tell the nations, tell the American people what they are planning to do that year. This is putting a political pressure from the people to the legislators to act. Have you seen, like, they will talk about an individual and everybody claps? I mean, if you haven't seen the State of the Union address, you should watch it sometime. That is, a guy comes in to the House of Representatives where everyone is sitting, all the elected officials, senators, and Supreme Court justices. And then he comes and says, now Nancy Pelosi is the speaker. So he'll say, Madam Speaker, the President of the United States. He ushers in, and the president walks in, and everybody claps. He goes to the podium, and he gives his speech. You might remember watching the meme of Nancy Pelosi tearing the speech after the pages of the Trump speech, right? That was the recent State of the Union address. So now, the State of the Union gives the president the platform, and he will talk about an individual, how he benefited from a particular policy, and how we should do more of those. And every time they bring an individual, they're bringing a story, and stories are more powerful to convince the legislators and the American public in support of the policy ideas they have. Okay, so those two roles, Commander-in-Chief, the first legislator. The third one, Chief Bureaucrat. Write it down. What is Chief Bureaucrat means? Okay, let me give you an example of bureaucracy. Have you been to DMV? Yes. So you know what a bureaucracy is, how it works. It has different layers of organization, right? Bureaucracy. It has rules, and it moves slowly like a old clunkering machine, right? And you know, in DMV, you wait for a long time. Everything happens slow. You do it in a private sector, it's different. You can't fire people easily in bureaucracy. So the president is the chief bureaucrat. That shows how hard his job is. That's one of the 3 hats he wears. One of the 8 hats. This is the 3rd hat I'm talking about. He has to make the machine move. Now here, he appoints about thousands, 5,000 say, of political appointments. So there are 2 types. There are permanent employees in the federal government who are there, invariable of what president comes and goes. And there's people who are appointed by the president temporarily. Okay? What do you mean temporarily? They will be there as long as the president wants him or her to be there. Or at the maximum of when the president leaves, his term ends, they got to leave because the new president comes and the new president appoints another 5,000 of his political appointees to make the federal government work. and he's the chief bureaucrat, and he has to appoint people with talent and capacity to do the job, and he has to fire them if he don't think they're capable of doing the job. It's a chief bureaucrat. And jobs like what? Jobs range from ambassadors, right? How many countries are there? Right? He had to send 190 ambassadors, because we don't send ambassador to Iran because of conflict with them. So there are countries people don't want to go as an ambassador, and there are countries which people love to go to as an ambassador. The cushiest and the most precious ones, like going to London or Paris, yes, as ambassador. And it goes to people who have the talent and also who favor the president, who help the president. So he appoints a lot of, this is like top level, but there's also bottom level, small level positions that the president appoints for temporary position in the federal government. Okay, so he's the chief bureaucrat, and he has to make the political appointees and the permanent appointees work. The permanent appointees, I could give you an example of an interesting, in the White House, there are people who are working invariable of who comes in or goes out. Like there's a guy whose job is to go around winding the clocks in the White House. There are that many clocks. There's chefs who work in the White House kitchen, and they make sure what the president likes, they will have them and make it. Yeah, it's not always all the case free, because they will take it from the pay of the president for the groceries. Yeah, another different conversation. So let's talk about the fourth one. Fourth one is economist in chief. Economist in chief. What is economist in chief? It's economics. Right now, the country is going through an economic recession, right? And because of it, the entire public look for the president, Congress, especially the president, to help Americans. So when Trump signed this bill, okay, relief, pandemic relief, he said like, oh, with T, I never signed anything with T. He said to Mitch McConnell, he's talking about trillions of dollars he has been spent by the federal government to help the economy. If you go to 19th century in America, the presidents who ran for office didn't talk about economics. They were not expected to. Why? Because that was not the realm or focus of the presidency. It became vital, very important when FDR became the president, because Great Depression created the presidential candidate at the time, FDR, focused on it in the 1930s early, and then as president, policies of economic success for the country. So now the president doesn't always have an education in economics. So you know what they have? They have a committee. They have a committee of economic advisors who advise the president on economic policies. So who are these people? Well, they are people who are professors of economics usually. Like Obama, they have a council, and there's a chairman for the council. The chief economist was from Chicago, University of Chicago for Obama. Whereas for Bill Clinton, it was Stiglitz. He's from Columbia University, economics professor who won a Nobel Prize. So they will have someone who gel with them in their philosophy of economics and ask them to advise. So Ronald Reagan had Milton Friedman advise him in economics. Reaganomics, yeah, it came from Milton Friedman's ideas, free market economics. So economics, he's the economist in chief. Macroeconomics, you studied micro and macro, you will study later. Macro deals with large things of firms, a country's economic situation, trade, all this. And the president deals with this. It's a big responsibility. It's a huge hat to wear, right? So, economist in chief. Next one, top diplomat. Top diplomat. So that's the fifth hat. Top diplomat. What is a diplomat? When you think of a diplomat, for me, when I think of a diplomat, the first American diplomat, Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin, yes, same man in the $100 bill, he went to France, right? And did what? He wined and dined with the French. And he built relationship with the French to make them help America so that we could defeat the British. We were fighting the British, right, in a Revolutionary War, but we need help. And the French won't give the help right away because they want to know if they help America, is it worth it? Worth it means what? Will we really be able to defeat the British? So Benjamin Franklin, as a diplomat, did his job really well. Later, Thomas Jefferson followed him. Now you have diplomats around the world, right? There are diplomats, not just ambassadors, as I mentioned before, but there's also consulate generals. Every embassy and consulate, there's only one embassy in each country, American embassy, and there will be multiple consulates. And consulates have consulate generals, and there are staffs who are working in there. They all have diplomatic passports, and they are American diplomats doing America's agenda, right? Agenda. What do you mean American agenda? Well, American interest, economic, military, political interest. They are supposed to advance our interest. So that, just like I gave you the example of Benjamin Franklin, his job is to make the French help America. Give money, they gave money, weapons, and ships. And they came to fight with us against the British. So that's the job. That's helping America. So these diplomats help America around the world in achieving American goals. But the goals are set by the President of the United States. And that's why he's the top diplomat. He sets the agenda, what America's goals is, what its interests are. Well, that will be based on the politician's ideology and his campaign promises to his voters. And he might not know all the regions, right? I mean, they prepare hard for political campaigns, but you cannot expect Trump to know all the regional political nuances and their history. So they have the help from Secretary of State. Secretary of State. And that Secretary of State control the entire diplomatic body. He controls it, and he completely has a responsibility working under the President of the United States. So the chief architect of American foreign policy is the Secretary of State, but they work under the President. So whatever the President says, that becomes the policy. Sometimes Trump and Secretary of State contradict. Remember Tillerson, when he was appointed as the Secretary of State? They contradicted, and so that's why Trump fired Tillerson. So he's a top diplomat. Top diplomat. It's a very important role. Because the diplomat, he has to appoint ambassadors who go and make the relationship and set goals. It's really hard for different countries. Policy which we have with England is not the same with India or China or with Japan or South Korea. It varies country to country. And you have to know strategic advances. So more presidents are leaning in favor with India in order to balance China's growth. So you have to understand those, right? Okay. Now the next one, head of state. Write it down. Head of state, 3 words. That's the next role. Before you write down further about head of state, there are 2 types, head of government and head of state. In America, the president has both those heads, head of state and head of government. But you could just have head of state there. If you go to other countries, say for England, Israel, the prime minister is the head of the government, but he is not the head of the state. So in England, the queen is the head of the state. In Israel, the president is the head of the state. In India also, the prime minister is head of the government. So head of the government is he leads the government, but he doesn't lead. What would be the role of a head of a state? Like the president of the United States. He does lead the government, but also he leads, he's a representative. He let me give you examples. He goes and lights up the Christmas tree in, and that's because it's a ceremonial role. If there is a new battle aircraft carrier is launched, a brand new, he will go with the champagne and break it in the bow of the ship. That's a ceremonial job. When a new ambassador comes from another country, say an Indian ambassador comes to America, he will go and meet the President of the United States to get his approval to work here as an Indian ambassador to the US. He will give his credentials to the President. Whereas if you go to other countries, they will go and meet the head of the state, whoever the head of the state is. Here the President is the head of the state and the head of the government. And he has a role to play around the world as the capital, the representative of the United States. Okay? So that's a hat he wears, especially in ceremonial duties. The next one, party leader. So seventh one, party leader. Party leader. Now, he might be the President of the United States, which means for the entire country, for all citizens of the United States. But he's still his party's leader. What's that mean? Like Trump is the Republican Party leader. And when Obama was president, he's the party's leader. So it comes with responsibilities. So they have to make sure their party wins. So they will go and fundraise for their party. They also campaign for their party members so that they could get re-elected or elected. Why? Because it helps them if they have more of their party members in the House and the Senate. It is more easier to pass the bills which the president's agenda wants, correct? So he helps. The party leaders sometimes have to do jobs which they don't like. Like, for example, Bill Clinton was being criticized when he was president. He gave the White House Lincoln bedroom for one of the big donors to stay for a night. So people were saying, look at this. He is selling the White House room for the highest bidder. And so party leaders, as a party leader, you have to, again, even though you're the President of the United States, and then you have to go and fundraise and help others get elected. So that's the party leader's role. The next one is a very interesting role, and it was created by Teddy Roosevelt. Write it down. Bully pulpit. Bully pulpit. Bully, when you think of, even in the beginning when I read, I thought, oh, bully, like a high school bully. We are talking about noun bully, right? But Teddy Roosevelt was talking in an adjective bully. I didn't even know that. I had to look up the dictionary to see the difference. Adjective bully means wonderful. So he's saying bully. He always, even in biographies, if you read of him, he's like, that's bully. He would say, that's bully means wonderful, wonderful. Bully pulpit. He's saying it's a wonderful pulpit. Pulpit means it's like you go to church, the pastor stands on a stage and talks about preaches, right? So it's a pulpit, like a small stage. It's a wonderful stage because the president can preach his ideas to the world. He has the biggest microphone and he could yell to the entire country and to the world, and people will listen because he's the President of the United States. That emblem, everywhere they go on their podium, it's there, right? Even if they go to foreign countries, they carry the podium in the plane. Oh yeah, not just the podium. They carry his helicopters. They carry his helicopters. Marine One helicopters, 3, 4, they will put them in the belly of a big plane and carry them. They will carry the car. And all the other leaders come to a different country, they will use whatever automobile given by that country's. But not the President of the United States. He carries and goes, thousands of people go along with, I'm talking about security detail and press and others. It's enormous. So bully pulpit, it's a huge responsibility. It's an impossible job. This is not a ninth one. I just want you to, you could write it down as a ninth one if you want to remember it. But this is a hat. It's an impossible job. You cannot satisfy everyone. There will be always criticism. If you think you get criticism from your friends or family, even slight, multiply that by 1,000,000 times because there are millions of people and the passions are much stronger. They will criticize you and ruthlessly attack you. You have to handle it. I mean, Andrew Jackson was running for president. This I'm talking about early 19th century. His mother was called as a whore, and he cried when he read that in the paper. Can he handle that kind of criticism? I'm saying all these things for you to understand the job is really impossible. Lincoln has a very famous quote. The presidency is not a bed of roses even for an experienced politician. How hard it is to be a president. Would you be one if it's offered to you? Think about it. Okay. Now let's talk about his cabinet, the president's cabinet. Now, when I say cabinet, that includes the first person, vice president. That's right, write it down. The vice president of the United States. Okay? Do you think he will take the job as a vice president? Because many people, politicians, wouldn't want the job. Many wouldn't want the job. Yes, many of them would want it because it would be a stepping stone to the presidency. Like Biden was Obama's vice president, right? He has ran for president before, was never able to secure the nomination. Look at that now. He was able to secure the Democratic nomination because one of the main things is his visibility, and he was Obama's vice president. It gives you a lot of push towards the presidency. And there is another option. If you are a vice president, if the president dies, you get to be the president. But that was not the case when the Constitution was written. They didn't think of that. 10th president, John Tyler. Yes. When he was a vice president. When the president dies, the Constitution did not say that he could become president at the time. But he came and said, well, I'm going to be president. There are people who criticize, you can't be president. You were elected to be vice president. How could you be president? And you could do the job of the president, the duties, but you cannot assume the office of the president of the United States. Even former presidents like John Quincy Adams and others criticized him as that, how could he take that office? But he sets the precedent, Precedent, precedent. That is, I'm going to take this and run. And he won't even open letters which was addressed to him as president. He will not open letters if it doesn't say President Tyler. He wants to be addressed as President Tyler because there was that much controversy there. But later, the amendment, happened, succession, which shows vice president becomes, and if vice president dies, then, but that happened way later. But because of John Tyler, then when Abraham Lincoln died, Andrew Johnson get to be the president. Otherwise, they will not be able to take the position as their criticizers thought. Isn't that interesting? Anyway, so when John Adams was the first vice president, he wrote to his wife, I'm paraphrasing, I might be everything, but I might be nothing. Because the job, actually, if you look at it, it's not powerful. The power is given to the president by Congress. You saw the three ways, right? Inherent powers, express powers, delegated powers in the beginning. Given to president, not to vice president. Vice president could get some powers if the president is willing to give him or her. Seems like Biden might pick a VP, a woman VP nominee. So, and if he wins she will be a vice president. So when Obama was running for office and he picked Biden as a nominee, Biden said, I will accept the nomination provided I get to be your vice president in making important decisions with me. So he's asking the future president, if you become the president, you have to share some time with me. You cannot just use me and put me out. Because Kennedy, when he used Johnson to be the vice president to win the South, because Kennedy is from Massachusetts, Johnson is from Texas, then they didn't ask him for opinions on any issues. And Johnson was so mad, upset. He will act sad. LBJ. Right? Well, then Kennedy died and LBJ became president. Right? And so, and Biden asked it and he was given. And so twice, he also asked, I think twice, lunch or coffee, twice a week. Because Truman, when he was vice president, he didn't want to be, but he was forced to be vice president. FDR wanted him to be. And FDR saw him only a couple of times. And FDR died. And Truman did not want to be president. He said to the reporters, boys, if you ever pray, please pray for me now. I feel like the heaven and the stars and moon fell on me. Because it's a huge responsibility. Some people would long to be president since childhood, like LBJ, or some people like Teddy Roosevelt, who was vice president and became president because McKinley, his president, was shot and killed. And he get to be the president. But he longed for being a president. Even in his 30s, when he's walking by the White House, his heartbeat will go up that one day, maybe, I will be president. So the vice president's job, another, I'm paraphrasing from a 19th century vice president, it's not worth the pitcher of warm piss. It doesn't have powers unless the president gives you. You mean you have technically a tie vote to break a tie vote in the US Senate. You will go and do ceremonial jobs to funerals the president cannot attend. And it doesn't have much stress either, I accept. But people who aspire for bigger role, involvement in history, is not looking for ceremonial jobs. They're looking for active role in history. So the vice presidency doesn't have, according to the Constitution, any powers as much as the president gives the vice president. Okay, good. Now the next, we'll look at the cabinet roles, short, because the time is coming close. I don't want to keep it long. And cabinet roles are the cabinet members. I already told you George Washington's cabinet, right? The 4 members. Now we have, you know what's the last one in the cabinet? Yes, Secretary of Homeland, Homeland Secretary. That was created in the 21st century after 9/11, right? Immigration, everything was put under it. ICE, right? ICE, taking children is a big political issue, putting them in cages, as the Democrats call. All this comes under Homeland Security Secretary. The president have to manage all these secretaries. Interior, Commerce, Agriculture, all this came later after George Washington's the initial 4. But the cabinet members, the powerful ones are the initial 4. Always, even in the US Senate or in the cabinet, the original have power. Even in House of Representatives, the committees, we talked about committees, right? The old committees have power. Appropriations Committee, money, right? These are old committees. The new committees, not so much. Even though the intelligence has some power, but not prestigious. Just like the schools, the old schools, Harvard, Columbia, the Ivy League schools, the old schools have name, reputation, power, prestige. And everybody want to be part of that. And same with the secretaries in the cabinet. Okay? And each cabinet member is chosen specifically for their talent to manage the bureaucracy of the entire department. So Secretary of State should be able to manage all these diplomats around the world and run that office. You can imagine? And report to the president. Yeah. And Secretary of Defense, Pentagon, who has the biggest budget, multiple times more than the Secretary of Department, Secretary of State, because Pentagon, right? It has miles. You could jog around in miles in Pentagon. That many floors and that many lobbies, and all this is managed by Secretary of Defense. We have military bases around the world, hundreds of them, and all of this has to be managed. The enormous pressure. The president overlooks all of these cabinet members. Let me talk about another important person when you talk about the executive branch this week, and especially under president. First lady, write it down. First lady. First lady, usually, historically, I'm talking about 19th century and 18th century, George Washington's wife, Martha Washington, right? Martha Washington was very active. Even before George Washington became president, when he was fighting the war, she would go to the war front and have given blankets and active participation. Right? At the time, you had to be in a horseback and go for miles, and it's very hard during cold and others. She worked for the country. But as a president's wife, she has only ceremonial duty. Like Lincoln's wife, Lincoln had enormous powers, but Lincoln's wife was just looking at the decoration of the White House. She will ask again and again money from Congress to decorate the White House. And Congress were annoyed that she's asking for more money to decorate the White House when there's a civil war going on. And the role changed with Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt changed the role of the First Lady. Well, there are a few reasons for it. One was FDR was not able to walk because of his disability due to polio. So Eleanor Roosevelt will go everywhere and was his eyes and ears. And she was active. That's not only because FDR was disabled and she was able to take an active part in going around and checking and coming and telling FDR what's going on in the country, but also, I'll come to the second one, she will go everywhere, means everywhere, like to poor neighborhoods without Secret Service, to the South when there was prize named on her head by Ku Klux Klan because she was supporting African Americans, poor people that white supremacists thought she is spoiling this country, and they had a prize for her, but she would go drive her car. You probably saw it in the video without even bullets in her gun. She would just have the gun for safety without any bullets. She was very, very, the second reason, inspired to do good in this world. And well, that's come from her teacher in the age of about 16 when she was in England for a little while. The teacher said, your responsibility, that means anyone who has privilege, must help the unfortunate. And she did. Even though, despite being shy and awkward, she felt, she became the emboldened lady. Because of her, the role changed, First Lady role. So if you look at in the 21st century, the Bush was the first 21st century president. His wife's, Laura Bush, role was what? Literacy, because he was a school teacher. So literacy for children, right? Reading. Second one was Michelle Obama. What was her role? Anybody know her policy? Let's move, right? Reduce childhood obesity. So eat healthy vegetables and other things and active exercise. You would have seen videos of her with children doing exercise. Right? She's an active exerciser. I think she exercises every day at 5 o'clock in the morning, lifting weights. Yes. The third person, First Lady of 21st century, Melania Trump. You know what her policy agenda is? Cyberbullying. Yes. To stop cyberbullying. I know I smile because some feel that Trump is the biggest cyberbully in Twitter, right? Criticizers say, like, well, you just tie up your husband and take away his phone, your mission is accomplished. But cyberbullying is her agenda. So each First Lady keeps an agenda, and they get a chief of staff and few staff paid by the taxpayers' dollars. So they get to complete their work. It's not like the 19th century First Lady who just sits there and greets the dignitaries when there is an event in the White House. Okay, so now we talked about the presidency's powers, roles, different roles the president plays, his cabinet, short, and the vice president and the First Lady. I want you to think about whether the American presidency is an imperial presidency or is it still a humble one. Imperial means it becomes haughty, becomes like a king with enormous powers and not responding to the people. What do you think? Well, your thought should be reflected based on what you observe in this world. Look around yourself, the presidency, what it says in the news, both sides, what the left and the right says, and make up your mind. Good luck. I'll see you in the next lecture.